So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this VPH webinar on bridging the gap, translating research into clinical practice and industry use. I'm Ramella and I'm a member of the VPH Young Scientist Committee, and I'm here together with Luca Bontempi, a member of this group as well. It's a pleasure to me, for me having here in this webinar Professor Monika Colombo, Dr. Simon Winther, and Professor Frank Gijsen. This webinar is structured in a little bit different way with respect to the past webinar. For those who have experience in this in the VPH webinars, it will be a panel discussion, more like organized as a round table. We will approach three different topics, from the building of a tool that can be used in the clinical practice, in building the trust for this tool, and which are the future trends for adopting this kind of in silico tools in the clinical practice. So let me introduce you. First, a few instructions for who is attending. You can type a question in the chat anytime. There will be then some open discussions during the webinar. You will see some slides that will guide us. During this open discussion, you can either write the question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and you will be unmuted and you will be able to ask the question directly to the speakers. So let me introduce you the female of this discussion, that is Professor Monika Colombo. She's a tenure-track assistant professor at the Department of Mechanical Engineering and Production at the Aarhus University in Denmark. She did her PhD in Politecnico di Milano, and she spent also a doctoral fellowship at the MIT. Her doctoral thesis was awarded as the best doctoral thesis in 2022. And after her PhD, she attended a postdoc period at the ETH in Zurich, and then she moved to Aarhus, where she founded the cardiovascular engineering group. Her research focus is mainly on cardiovascular engineering, and especially on the integration between in vitro, in silico, and imaging approaches. So the first question to you, Monika. From your experience, what is the most effective way for engineers to approach a clinician with a new in silico tool or model that they are developing?
So first of all, thank Joanna and Luca and the committee for inviting me to this talk. And my experience, it's a little bit mixed, because I have worked with for many times with engineers and in first place, and then I recently started to work with clinicians on a daily basis. And from my perspective, it's always extremely effective to start from a clinical question. And this is something that we are, as engineers and bioengineers, always taught to start with, to focus first on the clinical need and then to move towards the application or the development of the tool. And to bring a brief example, it also means that sometimes you need first to understand what is the clinician knowledge of the engineering tools that you are going to propose. Because some of them are extremely knowledgeable with engineering approaches, but many times some of them are not confident with the terminology of CFD, in silico, FEM, FSI tools that we usually use to provide some key clinical parameters to them.
Thank you very much, Monika.
Yeah. Let's introduce our second speaker. Dr. Simon Winther is a medical doctor and senior consultant in cardiovascular imaging at the Gottsrud Hospital in Denmark. And our first question for you is, when you first evaluate a new engineering tool, and in particular new in silico engineering tools, what are the key elements that make you think these tools can have a clinical impact in our in a clinical setting?
Thank you for the nice presentation. Yeah, I'm a clinical cardiologist working with focus on coronary artery disease, mainly with cardiac CT. And what engineered tool would fit into the clinical practice mainly depends on what kind of tool it is. So it's actually a bit difficult question to answer. Looking at cardiac CT, we have tools which improve the images from the cardiac CT based on AI models, and that could be like iterative reconstruction tools or motion correction tools. And based on that, we actually normally just evaluate the images, whether they improve or not. We also have tools which like segment the heart or do plaque characterization. And once again, it's simply like evaluating the images compared to what we would have done ourselves manually. So if the tools help us doing what we should do manually, we are quite adaptable. However, when it comes to tools which try to change our management of the patient, that is really difficult, because then it has to be guideline approved, such tools, also FDA approved, of course, but before we're taking it into guidelines or into clinical practice, it has to be adapted into guideline. And the way to come all that way through guidelines, that's really tough. And then finally, with cardiac CT, we see prediction tools where we include AI outcomes, like that could be like fat, coronary fat, where we put it into prediction models and improve the prediction of the patient. And once again, these tools should also be included into the guidelines and tested accordingly. And these guidelines, we use classes of recommendation and level of evidence, and it's really important for you engineers to be aware of the rules for getting these classes and levels of evidence before designing studies evaluating these tools you are producing.
Perfect, thank you, Simon. We can maybe reserve the follow-up questions for the open discussion and introduce our last but not least speaker. So Professor Frank Gijsen, he obtained the PhD at the University of Technology of Eindhoven. He then started as associate professor at the Department of Biomedical Engineering at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam, and then at the Department of Biomechanical Engineering at the TU Delft Engineering of University of Technology. Since this year, he is full professor and currently serves as head of the cardiovascular biomechanics section. And our first question for you is, from the engineering side, when and how should clinicians get involved in order to avoid to waste time and efforts from our engineering point of view?
Thank you, Luca. Whenever I think of a clinical project that I'm working on, I try to think in the concept of the chain of knowledge, as I call it. That chain contains basically 7 steps. The first one, Monika already alluded to, is that you want to identify a clinical problem. Second step would be translating that problem into a research question or research project, which often involves deep knowledge of the biological aspects of the problem. Then you move to the more engineering part, where you try to make microscale models, translate them into microscale models before you come into the VVUQ to validate and verify your model. After you've gone through these 5 steps, then you're basically ready to build your digital twin of the stuff that you are interested in. And the final step in that chain of knowledge is basically bringing that digital twin back into the clinical environment and evaluate the solution that you propose together with the clinician. So from these 7 steps, of course, it's very obvious that the first step is mainly driven by the clinician. The second step, where you translate that question into a research question, is also something that clinicians and biologists are involved. And especially the last step, that you take your solution back into the clinic, involves, of course, evaluation together with the clinician to see actually if the thing that you built works and is of use for the clinician. So I think these 3 steps, the first 2 and the last, are very essential to have clinicians involved, where the steps in the middle, of course, informing them is important, but that's where the hardcore engineering stuff plays the dominant role.
Thank you very much, Frank. It was a very clear list to follow for the next research to Pone. Let's open the discussion then. Please, Anna.
So the main topic for this open discussion is how to bring a concept and an engineering concept and giving a clinical relevance. So in general, we would like to discuss on which are the common pitfalls when early clinical feedback is missing. I don't know if one of you 3 speakers want to start, or otherwise I can start with a sort of question and
go ahead, kick up with the questions, Anna.
Okay, so my first question is that sometimes as engineer build tools that are complex, very detailed in terms of numerical models, mathematical models, and on the other side, on the medical side, the doctors and the clinicians want an exact replica of what is happening in the pathological environment they want to study, or in the human body. So I would like you to comment on how to find a compromise between a too complex engineering tool and a too complex representation of the human body.
Maybe I can start first to just bring my experience with some of these clinical questions, because it's true that for example, in my background, I'm a fluid mechanist, so I've always focused more on just the fluid flow in the cardiovascular system. And when it comes to get or give a reply or an answer to a clinician that is looking into testing a new treatment or a new device, then my first question is to them is typically to see whether they are more interested into fluid dynamics, into the structural mechanics, into which phenomena is actually the most important to them. And starting from that answer, I'll typically spend some time to explain what are the simplification and the necessary assumptions that we need to assume to start the model. And this is my typical experience. So I try to follow a bottom-up approach initiated by the clinical challenge, or the first clinical challenge, let's say.
From my perspective, I don't think that there necessarily has to be that conflict has to be present there. Again, it all depends on the context of use of your model. If you look, for instance, at and I guess this example will be mentioned a couple of times, this panel discussion on determining whether or not you need to treat a stenosis in the human coronary artery. The pressure drop over such an artery under hyperemia, so under a maximum flow through the arteries, is a very strong indicator whether or not such a stenosis is flow limiting and thus should be treated. and they have a single number. That's the output of that diagnosis. It's 0.8, then that's the magic number. Above it, it's good. Below this, you have to treat it. Now there's a digital twin on the market. It's called generated by HeartFlow, which basically has a very complex model underlying it, doing all the Navier-Stokes and all whatever you want to do on complex boundary conditions and such. But in the end, they just produce a column map with exactly that number, that FFR number. So the model can be complex. It's about how you present actually the outcome, which the clinician can use to improve or to base his diagnosis on. That's the essential step, I guess.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic tool. It's really easy to look at and decide whether there's disease impacting patients' management, whether you should revascularize or not. But still, HeartFlow is a great example because it also illustrates how difficult it is to get into guidelines and into clinical practice. Here you have to upload your CT scans to a server in US, and you have to pay $1,000, and then 4 hours later you will get the results back. But the problem is that I decided 2 minutes after the scan is finished whether I want to refer the patient for further diagnostic testing. So I don't want to wait 3 hours and 58 minutes for the results. So it also has really to be easy to use. It has to be adaptable into the clinical work.
But like also, I mean, I remember especially when you are struggling during your PhD study or postdoc to get to not enter into so many computational or methodological details when you are presenting your work. So I think it's very complex, and as Frank said, it relates to the field you're working in, of course. But I believe that yeah, keeping in mind the time required by the clinician and the time of the in silico tool to run, it's a very good starting point to align already the work among these two class of people, let's say.
But also it's important that if you have models where you include clinical variables and you put in also outcomes from AI models, it's important to be honest about how much impact does the AI model really give into the predictions. We have several examples where you mix up all these outcomes and you're sitting back when you're a clinician and thinking how much of this is actually just the clinical variables which we have available already doing the prediction of this new model. So being honest and easy presenting the results, how does the AI tool help us is also very important.
Thank you so much for this discussion, and we might find some time later to go on. So it's time to move to the second topic that is related to building trust for integrating the tool into the clinical practice, so more related to the model validation and demonstrating the model reliability. So the first question is for Simon. If you have experience, or you probably mentioned something before, what did it help to you for successfully integrate new tools into your busy clinical workflows without affecting the patient care?
Really, I hope the model should impact the patient care, because that's why we should do this. We should develop models where we change patient management, and that should be the tools, and it should be the goal of these tools to change what we're doing now. And HeartFlow is actually a great example, because FFRCT is great, because if we succeed developing non-invasive prediction of flow, we won't need invasive testing, and that would really change patient management. So we limit the number of unnecessary invasive testing. That would be brilliant. But it once again, it has to be really close integrated to the clinic, and part of that is also perhaps thinking of having it locally, and then perhaps use powerful computers locally at the hospitals. Quite often the CT scanner, the computer which run the CT scanner is quite powerful, and perhaps do some of the computation at these scanners. So it has to be really thoughtful how to integrate these tools.
Thank you so much. The next question is for, sorry, Frank, you were saying something.
Do you have examples of tools, new tools that you integrated in your workflow?
I think most tools, I was part of the coronary artery disease guidelines in 2024 from the European Heart Journal, Cardiology Society. And actually, there's quite limited AI tools integrated into clinic, because it is so difficult to get these tools, if they should change patient management through the studies needed to get into guidelines with clear recommendations. Pharma companies use billions of dollars to get a new drug into the market, and quite often it's really expensive to get the tools. And HeartFlow, which are really probably one of the most well-known companies, they only have a 2B recommendation in guidelines, because we miss outcome data, we miss perhaps really accuracy studies showing that around the cutoff it has clear accuracy, and this is of course really difficult for HeartFlow and other companies to demonstrate this. It needs really large studies. We have also been part of doing acoustic stratification of patients, doing acoustic heart sound analysis with AI tools, and trying to detect patients' turbulence in coronary artery disease secondary to coronary stenosis. And once again, these tools should be tested in really low probability cohorts, and once again, it's difficult to get accurate models which doesn't lead to overuse and need for further diagnostic testing. So there's plenty trying, but it's really difficult to get into the market.
But I also think that now you are leaving implicit a very crucial point for the engineers, like the amount of data that we can use, for example, to train our models or to test our model, and then for the validation. Because I mean, where we work in Denmark, for example, Simon, you had experience to create huge databases, and you are spending a huge effort to do that. But this is not the case in many other countries or for other specialties. And I think actually the number of data is what is limiting the current accuracy, and then introduction or validation and introduction in the guidelines of the new tools. So it's I see it's essential that the clinician put efforts in creating databases accessible to develop the new tools. Yeah.
Absolutely. We're trying to collect and make a database with 100,000 CT scan performed on clinical indication due to chest pain. And I think the part about collaboration is so important. We aim to make this open source, not like it's possible to access the CT scan directly, but make a sandbox where you can upload AI models, and then we will link them to our database of CT scans, and then we could do clinical validation of several AI tools for CT scans. We have a really nice registry. We have information from the invasive angiographies with FFR measurements. I think we have 250,000 ICAs where we have FFR probably in 25%. So we will have really large databases, but many studies or many people actually have access to these data, but it's quite difficult to access these also because of the GDPR. But we have to collaborate. We have to validate each other tools, and this way we will accelerate the validation, the development, but also the validation of AI tools for cardiac CT. But then finally, we have to think of, we need randomized studies. We need simple studies where we, in a group, do usual care, and then in another group, we do usual care plus the AI tool, and see whether this changed management. If it doesn't change management, then we shouldn't use that AI tool. It's quite simple.
Thank you for this discussion. And about validation, I have a question. You anticipated a little bit. The question is which kind of validation evidence you need to provide for a new in silico technology?
I think this is a crucial question for anyone that is developing in silico models, right? I mean, there is a family of validation approaches, and as you were introducing me, you also specified that I adopt sometimes in vitro methods, and it is, I think, very relevant to consider that the in vitro methods many times cannot keep the pace of in silico simulations, because we are able to run on clusters with different GPU powers, and we cannot many times replicate in a flow loop, for example, or in a cell culture experiment the same amount or the same quantity amount of data. So from my experience, that on both micro and macro scale, so working both with microfluidic devices, and then by testing, for example, aortic roots or aortic arch in a fluid loop system, I think it's extremely important to decide from the beginning what are the things, the elements, the engineering parameters that we want to validate. We won't be able to replicate the complexity of the entire in silico model, for example. And of course, but here we focus mostly on in silico tools, but many times we need to simplify also the in silico tools or the in silico model to meet the experimental setup. That said, I think it's extremely important to use different validation approaches based on the event, the parameter that we want to test. So I wouldn't use, for example, a pressure sensor to validate the leaflet movement or the leaflet deformation, because this is not the right tool. You need to use other approaches to have that. And yeah, if you are
it's
not
also
able to,
important with the external validity. So always think of external validity, collaborate with other groups, validate in their data, because quite often accuracy of these model drops 10–15% when tested in other groups data sets. So it's also really important.
So Monika, given the fact that most of the time we have only limited access to patient-specific data or population-based data, do you think there's an important role for synthetic data for the validation of our models?
I think it has a lot of power. It gives the possibility to test almost simultaneously different anatomical features, structural features, and so on. Sometimes when I've come across papers on synthetic data, many times an internal question that I had is how are these or how can these models be related to real scenarios? Like, is it are they really representative of the entire system? But we could also switch the question and saying, like, why don't we go back to use just idealized models? Like, why don't we use like idealized geometries and we go back to Poiseuille law calculation, for example? So my answer is that of course, if you have the availability of the data, in my perspective, it would be great to use that, and the synthetic data is would be like a second grade choice.
And perhaps you can use that for training and perhaps early testing, and then you should shift to human and demonstrate the validity of the results in human.
And I intervene in this comment with a question to Frank. That is, you have a model that is validated. Is it enough for securing the trust from a clinician, from the clinical field?
Well, that's always, I guess, an important point. I've been working in the hospital for 23 years now, in a pretty special setting, in the sense that once the thorax center where interventional cardiology is housed was started like 50+ years ago, the head of department decided to hire one engineer for every cardiologist he hired. And that was done for 20 years or so. And they were in the same room, they were in the same building, until the bioengineering group got too large and had to move out of the building. But that was a very long-lasting relationship between engineers and clinicians. And when I look back at the things that I've been doing in the clinical arena, and now specifically focusing on trust, I think you have to become part of the family. That does not mean that you have to do the operations yourself, but you have to be there. And you have to speak them, and not once a week, you have to be there every day, more or less. And that trust, I guess, also is built by being there not once, but being there for a long time. And it's more or less like I compare it to a marriage. You know, you have to invest a lot to keep things going, but then if everything turns out right, then you've got some fruitful collaborations on the horizon. I think something that you have to show as well is that you have your own work, and you have your own capacities, and you also have to say no to the clinician if you don't agree, because that's something that is also very important. One of my collaborators, the famous Professor Serhuis, always said to me, you, Frank, you're an engineer, you're arrogant and you're lazy. And he meant that as a compliment. And I think if you're in a good marriage, you can express yourself like that. So I think it's time, investing time, not only from the engineering point of view, of course, but also the clinician has to be open to your contribution to the field. So it goes both ways. It takes a lot of time and effort. That's about it.
Thanks, Frank, also for the take-home message. And I would like to open the discussion on this topic and maybe dive deeper into the barriers that we meet when we want to adopt these in silico models in the clinical settings. So technical, ethical, and regulatory ones. I think we have time for one question, if there is any from the audience. Otherwise, I think I can start opening the discussion about, I think we mentioned the importance of defining a context of use of our models. And this is also connected to the internal and external validation of our models. So, of course, it is important to define the context of use for our cohort of interest, our application of interest. But if we want then to extend to a different population or a different context, what are the barriers in that case?
I just start bringing back the example that Simon was mentioning about sharing the data. Like sometimes one of the clear barriers is obtaining the data from the clinics to test your algorithms and your tools. As Simon mentioned, alternative ways to not to share like sensitive data or with GDPR related data is that you have to maybe share your code or send your code to be validated on in other setups. And I think that here there is one crucial, let's say, limitation, which is intrinsic to the human nature of not being confident or feeling confident to send, for example, your codes, your algorithms, or your data to others that you don't know. So many times I had the experience of a lack of collaborative effort among, for example, engineers. This I think, and I started with a very minor barrier among all the big barriers that I leave to Frank and Simon to discuss.
I think there are quite a lot. I was until recently involved in a European project which is called In Silico World. That project basically aimed not at developing necessarily new research, but trying to get European projects together that were funded recently and to get them to a higher TLR level. And that project was based on the barriers that were in place to keep us from adopting these in silico models into the clinical practice. Of course, this was written 6 or 7 years ago. I forgot, of course, all the details, but I do remember that we identified 11 of them, and they were distributed over model development, model validation, data availability, education, and regulation. And in the end, also the translation, how we can convince companies to pick up the ideas once we've gone through these steps. So I guess I tried to find the website, and there's quite some documentation there that spell out these barriers in quite some detail. I think all of them are there. All of them are relevant. You cannot leave one out. Like I said before, you have to have good models that predict something useful. You have to have the data to validate them on and show them the validity of your model. But you also have to educate your clinicians. You also have to get regulatory improvement, and you have to find your companies that are willing to invest in these kind of developments. So it's a really broad range of barriers that are still there, and they are a bit different for each project. But within this in silico world project, at least, we developed a few of these tools that are available openly to help you at least identify them and see how to progress a bit.
I think also it's about putting up infrastructure with your data where it enables validation for other people in your data set. That's quite impactful to say, okay, we have these data. If you have a model, come and test it with us. We don't need all these regulatory improvements, because if we can do this quite easily, making sandbox where a model works in one server and connect to another server, so data don't have to transfer to other countries and so on. So that's one of the part. And the second part, I like the idea about the marriage because it make collaborations much easier, and involving clinicians or the other way around with the engineers is so important, because if you're part of the process, that's really important for your willingness to work on this and make these simple randomized trials, test this in clinic. Because if a company comes to our clinic and say we want this to be tested, we will say, oh, then we really want some money for our own research. This is a company coming and we're doing a big favor for this company. But if it is a friend, if it's a colleague, if it's something like that, it often is quite easy to test the things, and you can apply for funding in collaboration, and you will get it quite long with small effort.
Yeah. So within that project, we indeed generated a few databases that are openly accessible. One with angiographies, one with biodegradable stent data over time, one with bone imaging data. So if you're interested in one of these topics, please take a look at the website. They are there and accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
They don't pay me the project.
I'm already interested. Please put it in the chat so I can go and have a look.
In the meanwhile, we have two questions from the audience. I will keep the question from Moin for the next open discussion that is more related. So that the last question, the other question is by Robin May, that said, apart from the example of heart flow that we discussed before, there are few examples of randomized controlled trials that show that incorporating digital twins into the clinical practice can actually help in improving patient outcomes. Why you think there are few of them?
You have to identify tools which are validated good enough, so you actually want to set up a randomized trials to which will impact patient management. So the tool has to be validated substantially with diagnostic accuracy in different cohorts and so on and so on. And if you get a tool which is able to do that, it's quite simple to set these studies up. But once again, we have to collaborate about this, and we have to be a big family to do this. I think that's probably the reasons why it's difficult to get it into the randomized trials.
And one of the big barriers that we identified during the In Silico World project, and that's something that was identified by Simon before as well, is of course you have to go through regulatory affairs. and especially in Europe, that's not very easy in the sense that not much is well regulated. That compared to the FDA, the EMD is a bit more immature, if I may put it like that, and have much less experience with getting these tools like the heart flows approved, and that's a big problem.
Thank you, Frank, and all the other panelists, of course. And let's move to our last topic. So we would like to dive deeper into the new and innovative trends in our community. So we'll start with a question for Simon. And did you see a shift in clinicians' openness about these new models? And what is driving this change for you?
Absolutely, we have seen a change. I think the biggest changes we have seen is in tools which simplify our workday. That's like segmentations of structures. Last year, Siemens comes up with an automatic calcium score. You have like 40 images which you look for Hounsfield units, about 130, and before we have to make a circle around each of these dots, and then it could measure the calcium score, and they put in a simple AI tool which did this for us, and it saved me 1 minute in each case or so, and this is the best part. I've introduced this in my clinic. Well, it's fantastic, and it's so simple, and that way I think we are getting more and more open for this this kind of simple tools which actually help us a lot, and we can see that these are accurate, and it makes it valuable for us. I haven't seen the big shift in tools which really change patient management, but I'm pretty sure that it will come. Opportunistic screening for different diseases is really an opportunity, because if you do a CT scan or an MRI, you get images of different organs, and then you can screen for these diseases on images which are done anyway. I think this will come quite fast. In radiology, we have AI models which predict bone mineral density. You mentioned that, Frank, and that's coming up. But all these tools is small companies that want the $20 or $30 or $100, and halfway want $1,000 for the measurements. And in Denmark, we for sure won't pay that, because it's not easy to get that into the healthcare society and the healthcare economic, because we don't pay like that. So it needs to get out to the companies and be part of the way we buy softwares or scanners, and introducing these information and software applications into the software we already have.
Thank you, Simon. And regarding these new trends, we would like to ask Frank, what do you think are these new trends that are shaping this clinical adoption, and maybe something about also industry, since we didn't talk much about this.
So I guess for the new trends, I think the ones in the technological arena are pretty clear. Of course, we have models that are getting much more advanced. We have very powerful computers, so we can do very detailed, sophisticated simulations that still take a long time. But if we combine that with surrogate modeling or AI tools, we can speed up those simulations significantly. So I think we're getting closer and closer, at least from a technical point of view, that we can easily do patient or population-specific modeling on a large scale in the very near future. I think the introduction of the tools, I would say, of course, we need to keep on developing our technological tools very much so. But I think if you look at trends where we look at the adaptation of these models, I think it's more important, or well, as important, and sorry for repeating myself, is to look at the education of our engineers and clinicians, so that the engineers understand better what kind of problems they should be tackling, and the other way around, that clinicians understand better what we are offering them with our tools. And regulation, of course, is something that is absolutely crucial before industry will adopt any of these tools and put in a lot of money and a lot of effort, like pharmacy, to do a clinical trial, because that's still something that is needed. From that perspective, I think it's worthwhile to mention that pharma, of course, does spend a lot of money on developing new drugs, and for them, having models of molecules is very common. So they have digital twins of all basically products that they develop, and they screen them with computational tools on forehand to reduce the number of products that they have to test in clinical practice. So from that perspective, I think using these models not only directly on patient specific level, but on a population level, to do some screening of tools, of devices, or diagnostic procedures. I think that's the first big steps that we're going to see with these in silico models.
Thank you. So I think we all agree that the marriage between clinicians and engineer, as all marriages, needs a very good communication. And our final question for Monika is, how do you translate these complex results, very technical, very engineering, into something that clinicians can understand and take in account in their clinical setting?
Yeah, I think that here we have to add to the marriage the variable of kids eventually. So if there are troubles, how to talk about those troubles, right? No, but I think one of the winning strategies that I've tried to use in the last years is to use a first listen and then explain approach, in the sense that it would be too arrogant, as to recall from as an engineering description, to propose our tools, complex tools, because they are not trivial at all, to translate them immediately into the clinical practice. And the way to show these results is very different from the way of preparing, let's say, figures or poster presentations or publications in our engineering scientific context. But the first approach that I use is to ask the clinician to explain me what is the most relevant issue in the specific pathology that they want to study, for example, or in the specific treatment, and to then have a thought on how to show our calculation to reflect that specific issue that they are talking about. So if, for example, they are looking at, or they would like to know what is the flow across the valve, it doesn't have any importance or relevance or primary relevance to show how it's the flow, for example, in the thoracic aorta. To bring like a very silly example, but so I think the way to effectively translate is first to align. Something that, as Frank and Simon said, you are able to align with the clinician or vice versa after some time that you spend together, when you try to understand what is the common language and what are the common knowledge that you start from.
Thank you. I think we can move on to the last open discussion. And it's related to which are the tips on for improving engineer, clinician and industry communication and aligning on the goals since the beginning. And I would like to open the discussion with the question that we received from the audience. From Wayne. He is part of a research team, and they are developing a physics-informed neural networks to predict cartilage behavior from MRI data. And they are interested in translating this research topic into the clinical and industrial settings. And is asking, from your experience, what would be the most effective way for us to engage potential industry partners at this stage?
Could you repeat, Anna, what he was working on?
He is, I summarize, he is building a tool on starting from MRI data. And he wants to understand how to engage industrial partners that can help in bringing this tool into the clinical and industrial settings.
Well, the first thing, I guess, what you generally do when developing tools, that they, whether it's musculoskeletal or cardiovascular, that they tend to be kind of a generic by nature, so that you can study all kinds of problems with your tool, which is something that we do in academia. If you want to get industry interested, then it's obviously important to find a very specific application where your tool is very useful for, and make sure that the industry is convinced that this is the case as well, which means that you have to have clinicians on board that demonstrate that there is a need in their community to have such a tool, and then taking it step by step from there, using retrospective data to prove, as proof of concept kind of development, and see whether or not the company is still involved, and try to go to take it from there. It depends a bit on the kind of problem. Is it something huge, like treating coronary artery disease? Is it something very niche-like? Is it something that you can sell as a service? Is it something that you can sell as a standalone product? So there's so many questions related to this question, and they all have their own paths, I think. For some examples, again, look at the in silico world. There's a few very different examples there, going from airway applications to bone to cardiovascular, and lots of documentation to be found there.
Yeah, once again, I would search for other research groups doing similar, whether it's possible to validate externally. If you have some nice tools, it's getting the validation right. It probably makes communication with both clinicians but also the industry much easier if you're able to validate what you're doing, and then of course you have to worry about the patencies and so on. But anyway, validation is so important.
Okay, so if you don't have other additional comments on this topic, I see that we don't have any other question on the chat. I would like to thank again the speaker for joining this webinar, and I take the chance to save the date for the next VPH conference that will be in Milan at the beginning of September next year. And thank you all for the attention and for attending this webinar. If you have any question for the speaker, you can still write to the email that you see on the slide. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.